Hello and welcome to Clock Spinning, the podcast of Magic's history as told card by card through Cube. I'm Austin, and with me as always is my co-host Connor. How are you today, Connor?
I'm pretty good. I've been busy, but we've got a giant slab of ribeye steak in the fridge right now that we got from my wife's cousin while we were traveling, and it has just been a joy to be plowing through that ribeye.
Dad told me that you ate the ribeye when he was visiting. Is there still more ribeye? How big is this ribeye?
I mean, it's pretty huge. I would say it's about half the size of a average human torso.
Whoa!
Just to put it in human anatomical terms, as you usually do.
I don't know if I like having it put in human anatomical terms.
For measuring meat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we got a lot left.
I should arrange a visit so that I can get in on this this half torso of ribeye.
Yeah, it's going fast.
All right, I'll start looking now. Well, today we're continuing our review of the black cards of Kamigawa. So we did the first 25 last episode, and now we're going to do another 25. Apologies, by the way, for the delay. We both have been traveling, so it's been a little tough to record. Well, Connor, I don't know, anything else to say about Steak before we dive in and talk about the last 25 black cards of Champions?
Just that if you're new to the show and you're kind of want to get a sense of what we're doing here and get up to speed with our rating system, you can check out episode 1, where we talk about all the white cards in Kamigawa and kind of give an overview of the block and introduction to what we're doing. And we also give kind of an overview of our IMPAB rating system, which stands for Instacut, Meh, Playable, Auto Include, and Build Around. And you'll be hearing probably all of those today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can also get on the Cube Cobra if you want and see how we've rated cards so far, if you want to see how that rating system shows up in practice. All right, should we dive in?
Let's do it. Okay, so first up in Black Part 2, we've got Myojin of Night's Reach. 5 BBB for a 5/2 Legendary Spirit. Yeah. The Myojin comes in with a divinity counter on it if you played it from your hand. It has indestructible as long as that divinity counter is on it. And you can remove the divinity counter from Myojin of Night's Reach to cause each opponent to discard his or her hand. Boy, is that a lot of mana and not a lot of stats.
so much mana. This must be one of the poorest mana to stat ratios in the game of Magic the Gathering.
I think so. I haven't done a deep dive on that, but it just feels awful looking at this. Just 5/2. I think the blue Myojin that we looked at was a 10 mana 3/3, which for me felt even worse, but this is pretty bad.
Yeah, I think it's the second worst Myojin stat line. So the others are a 4/6, 3/3, 7/4, and 8/8. And I think maybe this is better than 3/3, but other than that, I think this is incontestably the worst. I mean, this trades with, well, literally with one. This trades with Bushi. Oh, not Bushi. What's the 1/1 for 1 with Bushido? Devoted Retainer. This trades with Devoted Retainer. Oh, that's just not acceptable.
When you put it like that, well, at least the Myojin's indestructible for some amount of time.
Yeah, take that, Devoted Retainer. Yeah, and the other thing is I think it's the worst effect. So, I mean, the other ones, just as a reminder, the white one wraths the board. The blue one basically draws your deck. The red one is like an Armageddon, and the green one is like a one-sided Eureka for creatures. Like this effect isn't even, by the time you get to 8 mana, how many cards does your opponent have? 2? Like it's just, this card doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
The effect on this one is really disappointing, really bad for 8 mana, considering the stat line that you get with it. This Myojin especially makes me wonder kind of how much the design of these cards was sort of constrained by the size of the text box.
Yeah.
The kind of text that they needed to put in to sort of make the Myojin work thematically the way that they wanted them to. So you've got 3 lines of text for the divinity counter, another 2 lines of text to explain the indestructible with the divinity counter, and then that only leaves this tiny little gap at the bottom for the actual effect.
Right, it's like a line and a half.
Yeah, and in this case, it really makes you wonder, there's a lot of cool effects that Black has that are on brand, that are a lot more effective and impactful than opponent discards their hand on turn 8 or 9.
Yeah, it's like the flip cards. A lot of the flip cards have the same problem. There's just clearly not enough text to do something interesting. But now you mention it, it's like, what if this, for example, reanimated all the creatures in your graveyard or something? Like, you can imagine some cool splashy effect that would really make this thing exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, though, as weak as this is, the weakest Myojin, I think it's probably my number one Myojin art, maybe tied with Cleansing Fire, the white one. But this art is just so cool.
Yeah, you want to describe it? Good luck.
Yeah, I'll try. So it's by Kev Walker. It's got this kind of nice muted color palette. And then the Myojin herself is really horrifying looking. She has this long black flowing hair and then just all of these giant misformed hands coming out from under a cloak and then floating hands all around her. And then she also has this headpiece sort of thing coming out of the top with these poles coming out of the side of that with more hair dangling off of those. And it's just this really sinister looking spirit that would be terrifying to encounter, probably more terrifying than just discarding your hand. But yeah, I just think she looks really cool. And apparently someone agreed with that assessment so much that they made a Lego version of her.
I'm gonna click on this link live now and give everyone a reaction to it. Oh wow, that is so cool. Wow, it's really well executed. That's amazing.
Yeah, like a lot of thought went into this.
It's great because it's, we'll link it from the show notes, so click on the link. But it's great because it's really small. It's not like some kind of big, foot tall figure or something. It looks like it's maybe like a 3 or 4 inch figure. So it's really, really cleverly considered and put together. It really maximizes it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that someone else felt strongly enough about the design of this card to Legofy her.
Okay, so we I guess started with implying strongly about playability here, but where do you land on playability for this thing?
She's got to be an Instacut.
Yeah, I think so too. I just can't imagine. I was going to say I can't imagine this ever being cast, but I feel like the more playtest games we do, the more we realize, you know what? Actually, 8-drops do get cast in this format.
Yeah.
Much more than we expected. But honestly, as an 8 or 9, I'd much rather have, say, Kuro Pitlord than this thing. I just don't think this card is acceptable on raid or effect at 8 mana.
Just not enough impact.
We'll cut it with a twinge of regret. Let's go to Nezumi Bone-Reader. Nezumi Bone-Reader is 1 and a B for a 1/1 rat shaman. B, sacrifice a creature, target player discards a card. Play this ability only anytime you could play a sorcery. I'm not a huge fan of this card. The graveyard synergies are there sort of in this set. Like Soul Shift is an important theme, and I don't think this effect is quite good enough, particularly on a 2-mana 1/1 that just, other than the effect, doesn't do literally anything. Like I just can't get excited about this. There are better discard effects in the set. There's better graveyard outlets in the set. I don't want to include it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna step up to the Bone Reader's defense. I kind of like the effect. I guess I'm more positive about it than you are. I'm just kind of thinking this is a way of turning your chump blockers into pretty big annoyance for your opponent at not that much of a cost.
Can I reread the card for you?
Yeah.
Play this ability only anytime you could play a sorcery.
Oh,
I know. It keeps getting me too.
We need to go through and highlight that text.
Yeah, we need a script that highlights that. This is like the fourth time we bumped up into that.
Oh, man.
But I had the same reaction of the first time I read it, I was like, okay. Plus, especially with damage on the stack, as we keep saying, that would be really cool. You put the damage on the stack, sack it. It's a 2-for-1. But this sorcery clause keeps biting us.
Yeah, it's like a footnote that you never bother looking at. And then you realize it's actually super important.
Well, it's easy to get confused because, for example, in just a couple cards, we're going to talk about Nezumi Shortfang, which is also an activated discard effect, but that one does not have this restriction on it. So it's kind of hard to understand, or it's hard to keep track of okay, there's all these activated discard effects and some do and some don't require the sorcery thing.
Yeah.
So with that out of the way, where do you land on Nezumi Bone-Reader?
I think we can. I was going to say meh, but I definitely think we can cut it now.
Yeah, I'm also at Instacut. I will say I like the flavor text here. I'll just read it. 4 generations ago, old Splittail stole a bundle of scrolls from the Minamo school. Soon after, the first Nezumi shamans were born. So I really like that because it tells a story, in 2 sentences. It tells you a lot about the history of the Nezumi, these are relatively new and they kind of came about in this sort of illicit or strange way. And it implies that, Minamo school is powerful, so powerful, stealing a few scrolls could create a whole school of magic. Like it does a lot of storytelling in a couple sentences in an elegant way.
So playable flavor text, Instacut card.
Yeah, I'd say flavor text is a solid playable, but yeah, I think the card's an Instacut.
All right.
All right, cool.
Let's get him out. So we've got another rat coming up here. Nezumi Cutthroat, 1B for a 2/1 rat warrior with fear. And Nezumi Cutthroat can't block. I think we both kind of share some concerns about this little guy. Getting in for 2 damage that's going to be unblockable in a lot of circumstances every turn, starting on turn 2, seems like a pretty big deal.
This is a tough card to answer. Well, it has the fear problem, right? If it's either tough to answer or far too easy to answer. So I'll just lay that aside so I don't have to complain about that with every card with fear in this set. Most of the time it's going to be unblockable, and shipping in for 2 every turn, like, is a minimum or a maximum of a 10-turn clock, and that's a pretty real clock in this format. This format really routinely goes like turn 8, turn 9, turn 12, turn 14, and Nezumi Cutthroat helps prevent that, which is, I think, somewhat good from a cube design perspective. You want things that help close out games and create a clock and create a sense of urgency, but I think we'll have to watch how many of these get in, just because it could definitely lead to some super annoying, uninteractive situations.
Yeah, I rated him as a playable because he definitely is, I think, on power level in this kind of limited format. I'm not sure on how many copies we want. I said 2, but I don't have a great reason for it.
Yeah, I've bounced between 2 or 3 as well. I feel like 3 felt right just because it's pretty staple, but I could totally see dialing that up or down. He's definitely a premier thing that's worth prioritizing in your picks.
Right. Maybe we do start with 3 then, just so he pops up enough that we can actually see what place he ends up getting in the cube.
The one thing is that can't block downside, I feel, is very real. I feel like just in all my years of playing Magic, every time I play a card that says can't block, I think, well, that's barely a downside. And then you end up in these board states where you're like, oh my gosh, if I could block with this, my whole game would turn around. I feel like that's actually a very real downside outside of a like super, super aggressive deck. But this block is not set up to reliably turn out really, really aggressive decks in limited. And so I think, like, in the context of this block, I think that's actually a very real downside.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe that makes him more balanced or more reasonable than more worried about. And I think especially once we get to red in this block, which we will, our next color coming up, the red cards are abominable. And there is no aggro.
It's hard to understand them in terms of power level. It's rough.
They are so bad and so weak. Like, there just is no real aggro archetype. Like, black and red are the colors that are going to bring that traditionally. Maybe a bit of green. Red is just bringing nothing.
Well, here I think it's black-white in Kamigawa, right? Like, white has some genuinely good 1, 2, and 3 drops. As we found in all of our playtest games, Kitsune Blademaster, for example, just is this huge groan test. You just groaned. It's this huge groan test every time it hits the table.
Yeah. Now that you bring the Blademaster into the discussion, I feel like I'm going to groan a lot less about Nezumi Cutthroat than the Blademaster.
Oh, we got to track that. We should start a little groan tracker spreadsheet and see which draws more dismay.
Let's get a groan count going.
All right, but for now, we're on playable 3.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's go to our first black flip card, Nezumi Graverobber. 1 and a B for a 2/1 rat rogue with 1 and a B. Exile target card in an opponent's graveyard. If no cards are in that graveyard, flip it. And then the backside is Night Eyes the Desecrator. 4/2 rat wizard, 4 and a B. Put target creature card in a graveyard into play under your control. So, like a lot of flip cards, that's a lot, but it's a 2-mana 2/1 that exiles things, and when it does, it flips into a 4/2 that can reanimate for 5. I'm not totally sure about power level here. I think the base power level is pretty good, because like a 2-mana 2/1 is decent on its own. But just on fun factor, I feel like I almost don't have to get to power level, because the fun factor here is so real, right? It's like a 2-mana 2/1 that starts a little mini game and then flips into a pretty solid threat with a really fun disruptive effect that just tickles your brain. Like, this card's just so fun.
Yeah, I really dig this guy, and not just because Night Eyes the Desecrator has synergy with Iname Death Aspect
and a great name.
And a great name. That is one of the coolest names in this set, I think. I like that this card has a flip effect that's actually reasonable to pull off, especially in limited. probably not going to take you that long to empty either your or your opponent's graveyard, depending on who has the better creatures that you want to pull out. It doesn't require any other cards to set up, unlike Bushi Tenderfoot or Student of Elements, who are going to need at least some kind of help to get there. And it comes as like a 2-mana 2/1, which is not bad here.
And I actually think the ability is, I don't know if it would quite make it on that ability, but I think the ability is pretty decent. I mean, so it obviously is no Scavenging Ooze, right? Like it doesn't create any value when you exile these things, but being able to exile from your opponent's graveyard is pretty decent. Like if your opponent is doing a lot of soul shifting, you know, when the soul shift trigger goes on the stack, they have to target a thing and then you could just exile it in response. Like this really shuts down the soul shift deck pretty hard.
Yeah. As you point out, it doesn't have the play this only anytime you can play a sorcery.
No room in the text box.
No, they ran out.
Yeah, I think this card's just really good. I also think the art here is pretty good. Like a lot of the flip cards, we haven't been super thrilled with the art, but I think the artist Jim Nelson here did a good job kind of telling a story, conveying some mood and scenery, making both the characters really distinct. Like in this little postage stamp, I think he put out a really solid piece here that illustrates two characters pretty well.
Yeah. I also really enjoy how this Nezumi Graverobber has graduated to just full-on desecration.
The graduation's funny though, isn't it? Because there's this funny thing in which the design almost seems like it would imply that like he's going to reanimate the cards that he exiled. Like he's robbing the graves, but really he's robbing himself because he can't go reanimate the things that he's exiled. Kind of funny from a design and storytelling standpoint that he's actually getting worse. He'll have less material to rob from once he flips.
Good point. Maybe, you know, he's just practicing with the grave robbing. He's just practicing.
Oh, I like
a bunch
this
of
story.
other graves,
yeah.
And then he comes back. He's like, I know I got all these great dead bodies in my swamp, so I'm going to come back home after I've done all this grave robbing, and then we'll just desecrate the place.
Okay, yeah, I like your story. I like your storytelling there. That's great.
This is the power of flip cards. They make you think. They tell a story.
And as you pointed out, this is an uncommon. Like, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It doesn't matter for our cube, but it's just sort of hard to believe in the context of Kamigawa.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the flip cards, at least in Champions, each color has a rare flip card and an uncommon. And a lot of them are kind of reversed. Their rarities are reversed from what you would expect. Like in white, the uncommon flip card is Bushi Tenderfoot. And then the rare one is that Kitsune that lets you move auras around, basically.
Yeah, who we hate.
Yeah.
Where do you rate this thing?
I consider this guy an auto include.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just can't imagine, like, why would you not include it? It's fun, it's flashy, the power level is there, but not overpowered. Like, this thing's just super cool.
Yeah, just one of.
I think one of. I feel like the base for most Legends should be a 1X just for flavor reasons, if nothing else. And I also think, I don't know, this thing should be kind of a little prize that you snag and know you're not going to see it again.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, next up, another Nezumi, surprise. It's Nezumi Ronin, 2B for a 3/1 Rat Samurai twist with Bushido 1. So I don't have a ton to say about this card because there's not a ton on it. 3 mana for 3 damage is good in Champions. Yeah. He trades up with a lot of creatures. Having Bushido, he can trade with both of the Kodamas that we're going to see in green. He trades with Uyo in blue, Maloku. If for some reason Maloku is blocking Nezumi Ronin,
chooses to block it. Sure, that's a more tenuous example.
You know, I haven't play tested these. I'm just looking at power and toughness. He kills both in Name aspects. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's all of that.
I like this guy a lot too. I've got kind of a soft spot for him. It's one of those cards that I opened all these years ago, and I don't know that I've ever played with it really, but I like it. Like it's a good kind of solid role player. I really like the art here. There's a number of Scott M. Fisher pieces where he does this sort of abstract circle background thing. Like his Dark Confidant has it, Death of 1,000 Stings, Disrupting Shoal, Graceful Adept, one of Connor's favorite arts from the set. And it's just, honestly, every time it works for me, I just look at it and I go, yeah, that's cool. It's really cool. And then, yeah, as you're saying, I think the stat line is totally solid here. I don't think this is an amazing card, but I think it's a totally reasonable one.
Yeah. How many of these?
Well, so one thing I worry about a little bit with the Ronin is black is like is the soul shift color. It's the spirit, one of the most spirit centric colors. And I do worry about some of these black non-spirits competing with the spirits for space. So I think that I don't know that changes my answer on quantity, but it's just something I'm kind of going to be keeping an eye on as we shape the cube further.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I felt like this is a playable to me, like somewhere between playable and mad, but I think it's solid enough. I just can't imagine some number of these not being included. And as a stab in the dark, I said, I don't know, 3.
Yeah, I landed in the same place, playable 3.
Whoa. Well, if we're that aligned, let's just commit to it.
There you go. If you're new to the show, or actually, I'm not even sure if we've mentioned this, but when we're rating these cards, we do it separately. So we hide the part of the spreadsheet that shows the other person's ratings as we're going through.
Yeah, we want to avoid groupthink. We feel that the analysis of these cards is sort of sacred trust that we've been given, and we want to do it with the highest possible integrity.
Absolutely. It
does mean that we waste a lot of time in our comments duplicating what the other person wrote because we don't know someone else has done the exact same research.
And possibly we may not always read the other person's comments every time before we start the show.
Yeah, I'm going in blind a lot of the time.
Yeah. But it's working.
Yeah, I think so. If you agree it's working, listener, let us know, clockspinningpodcast@gmail.com. And if you think it's not working, listener, let us know, clockspinningpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, I guess we can end the meta segment here. Do you want to keep moving?
Yeah, let's go to the next rat.
I almost feel like I need some bumper music. All right, next rat. Nezumi Shortfang. Another flip card, so buckle up. 1 and a B for a 1/1 rat rogue. 1 and a B, tap. Target opponent discards a card. Then, if that player has no cards in hand, flip it. It flips into Stabwhisker the Odious. Rat Shaman, 3/3. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player loses 1 life for each card fewer than 3 in their hand. Okay, so again, that's a lot. It's a 2-mana 1/1 that 2 in a tap, discard it, and then when they're empty-handed, flips into a 3/3 that is also the rack, stapled to a 3/3. All right, this thing's the real deal. I'll also note black, like, objectively just has the best flip cards. Most of the other colors, it's like one of them is okay and the other one is like a turd. And then in black, it's like, wow, these are both just solid 2-mana plays that flip into really solid, like, just aggressive game-ending cards. Like, how did black get so lucky, Connor?
And it's not just the flip cards either.
That's true. Yeah, black in this set I really like it. Like, the cards are fun. They're all kind of classic black effects. They play together nicely. It's a fun color to be in. And you get to do all the soul shifty shenanigans. And who doesn't like that? Mm-hmm. This card has come up a couple times in playtesting. I think it's risen in our estimations. I think originally I had this at a playable, and I've realized this is just an auto include. Like, A, because it's cool, but B, because wow, is that effect real? Like, I read it the first time and I was like, that's pretty expensive. That's a lot of mana to have to sink into it. But the reality is, once you've activated it 2 or 3 times, like, you are just up so much on cards. Your opponent is so annoyed with you. The funny thing about it is, I would say in a lot of ways, when I've been playing with it, I actually wished it wouldn't flip, because I don't really feel like once you've done the empty-handed thing that you need a 3/3 with the rack stapled to it to win the game. Like, you're already winning at that point. And I feel like we had a couple playtest games where I stripped your hand. I was totally dominant. And then when the hand stripping ability went away, you clawed your way back into the game.
Yeah, a little bit, but it definitely put me in a really awkward position of, feeling the heat from this continuous discard effect and being really worried about him flipping, both because a 3/3 is just pretty solid and, is likely to be bigger than a lot of what you're playing anyway. But having that extra loss of life on top of it was, or at least felt like, a real problem, which I kind of like. It's creating this interesting dynamic when you're on the receiving end of it, a frustrating dynamic, but an interesting one where you need to be thinking about, is it worth more to me to try to hold on to just some chaff card that I can discard to try to keep the number of cards in my hand at the right level? Should I play this out? If I do, then Nezumi Shortfang is going to flip, and then I'm going to suffer from Stabwhisker. Like, it makes you think a lot. And it's an interesting card, and also, like, actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's interesting to contrast it with the Cutthroat of, like, this does give your opponent agency, as you said. Like, they can just choose to keep some cards in hand. They can try to empty their hand really quick and just go, you know what, I'm ready to go race. Or, like, it gives your opponent some interesting decisions. And I like that.
Yeah.
It's a mini game for both you and your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I also, what do you think of the art here? So the art here is, it's like the flip card thing where there's two figures. It's sort of unusual in that it's the background is just a wash. It's almost like an alpha thing of just like it's a blue and purple in the background. It's sort of indeterminate. And normally I don't like that, but I think on the flip cards it actually works pretty well because the art is so busy on these flip cards. I think it helps to have a really simple background.
Yeah, I really like that. How it's just this color wash in the back, and then they're actually sort of both standing on nondescript kind of rock in both the flipped and unflipped form. And I feel like that lets you just really focus on the characters in this tiny little piece of art. Like they're both in really kind of interesting dynamic poses. You get the sense of like this Nezumi Shortfang just kind of looks like an almost naked rat man. And then he flips it to Stabwhisker and, gets all this cool sort of swamp armor going on. And, you get the sense that this character has sort of evolved into Stabwhisker, and I feel like it's a lot cleaner as a piece of art. There was the blue card, I think it was Student of Elements, where the divider.
You hated that. I like that guy. The goofy, billowy clothes, feather art guy.
Yeah, the like flipped version of Student of Elements. I can't remember his name, but he's in these big billowy clothes, and then the dividing line between the two halves of the art is just this big wing, like a big bird wing, just chopping through the middle of the art. And I'm just like, what? Why is this here?
Yeah, but I agree. It is. It takes a certain kind of bravery to say, I am going to do a really simple background because I feel like that's not what Magic has done for most of its history. That's associated with lazy art in a lot of people's minds, but I think it's the right decision for this art.
Yeah.
I'll also say, obviously, all of the Nezumi invite, thinking of Master Splinter from, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they're rat people. But I'm pretty sure that Stabwhisker the Odious is like Master Splinter. Like I'm looking at the flip thing here, and the resemblance is strong.
I got to pull up a picture here.
You use the word evolved, and I like that too. Like a lot of these, I don't know that there's a problem with the other ones, but in this one, he's clearly aged as he's flipped. It really kind of has a feeling of the passage of time, and it tells a story. It's just a nice piece. Yeah. Good job, Darren.
Good work. How do we rate this?
Yeah, I have it as a 1x auto include because I can't imagine cutting it. I really can't imagine running multiple of it. Like that just seems gross. So I don't know. One of them seems fine to me.
Yeah, I think so. All right. We've made it through the wave of rats for now, though our next card also features rats in the art. This is Night Dealings, 2 BB for an enchantment. Whenever a source you control deals damage to another player, put that many theft counters on Night Dealings. And then you can pay 2 BB to remove X theft counters from Night Dealings and search your library for a non-land card with converted mana cost X, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So to sum that big mouthful up, you get theft counters on Night Dealings for dealing damage to your opponent, and then you can pay some mana, remove those theft counters, and search your library for any card except land. I like this card a lot. I don't think it's good, but there's a lot of things I like about it. The flavor feels like a slam dunk to me.
Okay, actually, before you can we evaluate it, can you explain that? Because I am really puzzled by the flavor here.
Okay.
What is the flavor?
The flavor that I'm getting, at least. I guess I should describe what's in the art. It doesn't help that much, but...
Yeah, good luck.
Okay, so you've got a couple of Nezumi who are... I mean, it looks like they would be stealing this jade statuette, but the card is called Night Dealings, so I guess they're actually trading with each other. But let's ignore that for now. Let's pretend that Night Dealings is just about stealing stuff. The flavor, as I see it, is your rats are getting in there, your Nezumi Cutthroats are getting in there and dealing damage to your opponent, right? And they're stealing stuff, like this jade statue. And then they're going out and they're pawning that jade statue.
Oh, they're dealing it on the black. Oh, yeah. Now I like the flavor a lot. That's very fun.
They're taking it to a fence. They're fencing
You're spending the proceeds.
Yes,
sure.
And you're selling your booty and getting cards.
Okay, that's a slam dunk. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for explaining that to me. I like this card much more already.
Thank you for acknowledging the slam dunk. Power-wise, I don't know if it's really there. This feels mostly like a sort of win more card. Like if you're in a position that you can pay, spend 4 mana on this and then also spend 4 mana for the effect and also have enough theft counters on Night Dealings to make it worth it, then the game's probably over already.
It's asking you to do so much work.
Yeah. So I don't know if it actually belongs in, but I like the design of this card. It feels cool. It feels like it should be fun to play with.
I feel like, to be honest, I just need to playtest this card. Like, I can't tell reading it. So it's a repeatable tutor, and that's obviously strong. Like, that's just an objectively strong thing to do. But it asks you to jump through a lot of hoops, as you're saying, and it asks you to put in 8 mana before you get the first card back out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just asking quite a lot of you. And, if you imagine, like, this is a 4 mana play, like, let's say your opponent's at 12, and you've already hit them because you're supposed to be dealing damage. So let's say your opponent's at 12. You deal another 5, let's say, the turn this comes down, and, like, yeah, you can go tutor, but I feel like at that point you're already kind of winning the game. Like, I feel like maybe if this card was cheap, like cost like 1 single black mana, but then like 6 to activate, that would be interesting. Because the problem is this doesn't get to see or take advantage of whatever damage you dealt in the early game.
Right. Yeah, I agree that it seems really difficult to evaluate without actually trying it. I feel like some games might end up being grindy enough that this actually does have some place to help you, look for a finisher, or even, just look for something like Nezumi Cutthroat to be able to get some damage in. But I also kind of want to have it in because I feel like we're not seeing that many interesting enchantments yet. In White and Blue, we saw 2 rare 4-cost enchantments that were basically irrelevant. Vassal's Duty and Swirl of the Mists was the blue one. They both sort of do nothing. And this seems like it could do something. And I just want some enchantment in here that is doing something and could be interesting or fun to play with.
Yeah, I find that persuasive. I kind of feel like we should, in some of our next round of playtesting, I almost feel like we should cheat a little bit with some of these hard to evaluate cards and not draft them, but just like give them to ourselves as a stipulation at the start. Like, okay, one of you is going to get night dealings in your pool at the start. Go draft and see how it feels to try to play a deck around it. Because I feel like otherwise it could take a really long time to try to understand if this card does anything. But I think if we play with it even a handful of times, it's going to be obvious, oh, this is way better than we thought, or this just never does anything.
Yeah, I like that idea. Just stipulate to night dealings.
Yeah. One other thing I'll say that just surprised me about this card is this sees a little bit of EDH play. It's in 600 decks on EDH Rec, but I'm kind of surprised this isn't more. I don't think it's particularly powerful, but it just seems like a fun, unique kind of toolbox card. It lets you tutor repeatedly, which is a powerful thing in a singleton format. Like, I feel like people should be throwing more of these into commander decks.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So where do you land on this? Like, what rating?
I feel like we call this a meh, just because we have so much uncertainty for now about whether it has any real value. And I think just one of them.
I agree on one. What about calling it a build around? It's not like a true build around, but I think it shares the build around DNA of, being a card that really requires other things around it to make it work and some specific deck design and drafting.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of like that. I feel like we haven't seen that much build around yet. So yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it. All right, let's talk about one of my favorite names in the set, Knight of Souls Betrayal. So Knight of Souls Betrayal is 2 BB for a legendary enchantment. All creatures get -1/-1. Okay, I love this card. I think it's very, very cool. It reminds me of that 7 mana thing in War in the Spark that gives all your things +1/+1 and all theirs -1/-1. Ethereal Absolution, I think it is. And that card is dynamite and game ending and backbreaking. I don't think this is quite as good. Like, the +1/+1 was a very real part of that card's upside and ability to just absolutely break symmetry and wreck your opponent's day. But I think -1/-1 have you read out for our listeners. But I think it's not just the things that outright kills. I think it's also just the fact that all of your opponent's creatures get worse and combat gets a lot more painful. Oh, and all of yours. Oh. I think I forgot for much of my discussion that this affects all creatures. Oh, dear. Oh.
So I really struggle to see the deck where you would want this, precisely because it affects all creatures, including your own. So in black...
That's a great note, Connor. I want to note that I did notice that when I was rating it, and I forgot as I was reading it today.
This card does not say play this ability only anytime you could play a sorcery, though. So we didn't miss that. But so out of 336 creatures in the block, 97 have just 1 toughness. So this just outright kills all of those or basically keeps him from being played. The problem is plenty of Black's creatures have 1 toughness, and quite a few of them are relatively expensive, X power 1 toughness creatures, going all the way up to the 6 mana 4/1 Kami of Lunacy.
Yeah, I think we just talked about like 5 1 toughness black creatures, and the next card is also a 1 toughness black 4
There you go. So it's, I'm struggling to see the deck where you actually want this card in. If you're sort of playing the typical black deck that is having, quite a few rats in there and some kind of spirit craft stuff going on, I don't think you want this card.
That makes me sad because I like the way this seems to suggest, go play like a creatureless control deck or a really interesting deck with very few creatures. There is a deck like that in the block, right? It's the Dampened Thought deck. But the problem is that deck really doesn't have much other reason to be in black, and this costs 2 BB. And so I just don't know. I don't know that there's a black-based deck, as you're saying, that's okay with just, really sacrificing its ability to play creatures. And yeah, I just don't see it.
Yeah, that's a good point about the Dampened Thought deck being, at least a theoretical possibility, but this would be a pretty weird splash for that deck to make.
I do think it's cool that it's a legendary enchantment. That's just a cool type line. I thought the shrines were the only legendary enchantments in the set, but I guess we get one more.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was kind of surprised to see this one just sort of standalone legendary enchantment, which makes it really cool because, it's suggesting that this Night of Souls Betrayal is the sort of historical event that's playing out on the battlefield.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't feel like they had to make it a like a cycle or something. I feel like Wizards was kind of enthralled to the idea of a cycle at this point in its history. My suspicion is the reason it's legendary is that the power level or obnoxiousness. Like if you had 2 or 3 of these, like in a constructed deck, like if you cast 2 or 3 of these, like that is just unbelievably cruel and annoying. And I suspect they just wanted to avoid anyone doing that.
There are actually, quite a few situations where I think it could also just be cruel and annoying to have one of these in Kamigawa Limited, not just because of the creatures that Black has, but if you look at kind of the white weenie deck, which relies on Bushido, if you look at the Aki in red, the poor tiny Aki who are already so weak, this just kills almost all of them. A good number of the Sword Tommy only have 1 toughness, so this is just, shutting out whole categories of creatures from the game.
Now that you've listed that, there's another nice flavor win in that all the things you listed are mortals. So this is like the Spirit's big play, and it mostly destroys mortal creatures, which is kind of a nice flavor win.
Oh, I like that. I didn't even think of that.
I will say on that note, I love the name. I feel like Night of Souls Betrayal. Like if my soul is turning against me, my very essence, if that's only means -1/-1, I feel like that's not too bad. Like it could be a lot worse.
It could be a lot more painful than that.
Yeah. One other note before we get to playability. This sees almost no commander play, but it does see a little bit of marginal play with a very marginal commander, Vati Ildal. So Vati Ildal is a creature with an activated ability that gives target creatures or makes target creatures power or toughness 1 until end of turn. And I think that's really cute. I like that.
Wow, what is that commander from?
Oh, I don't know. Let's go find out.
Vati Ildal.
Originally printed in Tempest, and then reprinted in the Time Shifted sheet in Time Spiral.
Wow.
4 mana, 3/3 in Golgari. Not a good card, but kind of a fun card.
Yeah, if you're running a Vati Ildal commander deck, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so on playability, so I had this at a meh and a 1x. I think, honestly, similar to your Night Dealings, I was just like, oh, wow, a cool enchantment. Like, my judgment is suspended. But I'm starting to think I'm maybe too optimistic there.
I mean, I'd be willing to try it. I had it as an insta-cut, but there is something appealing about this legendary enchantment with such a cool name. I kind of do want to try it.
All right, let's sneak one of them in at meh and see if we manage to make anything of it at some point. Right.
Okay, next up, speaking of 1/1s, we've got Numai Outcast, 3B for a 1/1 human samurai with Bushido 2, and you can pay B and 5 life to regenerate Numai Outcast. I mean, this is just Garbo, right? Am I crazy to think that?
No, it's just Garbo. I've been thinking it. I actually wrote her facial expression says it all. She's like grimacing and just looks like she's in terrible pain.
It really does.
When it Bushidos, it becomes a 4 mana 3/3, which is a hill giant, which is like the byword for mediocrity. And like a conditional hill giant that lets me pay 5 life for something that black can normally do, like for just a black mana.
That's a good point.
I think this card is
I didn't even
terrible.
think of that.
I mean, that's a quarter of your life total. And I feel like, so this isn't an attacker, right? Because your opponent's just going to be like, okay, I'll let the 1/1 through. there's no decision to make for your opponent there. So it's basically a blocker, but I feel like in a deck that wants a creature that helps stall out in the 4-drop slot, you can't afford to pay 5 life because you're trying to, hold out against your faster opponent.
Yeah. I could maybe see that regenerating ability being worth it if this could also be anything close to an offensive threat. But she's just purely a blocker and like a really expensive, painful one to have around. Like, how many times are you really going to block something bigger, pay 5 life, and you're just sort of putting off the inevitable if you don't have a bigger answer. If your opponent is swinging in with 4/4 and you're just blocking with the Outcast and paying 5 life to keep her alive, you're not actually changing the board state at all. You're just kind of killing yourself in a different way.
Yeah, if she was maybe like a 4-mana 3/1 or something, like I could see it being a more interesting card and more of a contender. But yeah, that stat line, like this thing's terrible. I'm really glad this is an uncommon because I opened a lot of Kamigawa back in the day, but I don't think I have many of these. And I think that's only because it's uncommon. Otherwise, I think I'd have like 300 of them in a box somewhere.
Yeah, this is exactly the kind of card that you'd be getting 300 of.
Yeah, instead of Sensei's Divining Top.
No.
Or something like you.
Which is also an uncommon.
Yeah, which is also, and yet the most expensive card in the set.
That hurts.
This seems like an easy insta-cut to me. It's one of those cards of like, yeah, you could make an argument it might have some effect or occasionally do a thing, but like, why? There's just, I don't know. Let's look at our last 2 cards. If we think about 4-drops, would you rather open and think about Night Dealings, Knight of Souls Betrayal, or Numai Outcast? Like, easy call.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, let's cut her.
All right, let's cut it. Let's talk about Oni Possession. 2 and a B for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, sack a creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has trample and is a demon spirit. I'm worried I'm just like enchanted with auras, but I'm liking this card. I feel like, sure, it guarantees like a 2-for-1, maybe a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1 or a 5-for-1, but like +3/+3 and trample is a big game. Like that is a kind of game finishing level of bonus. And I feel like there's something to talk about there.
Yeah, I think especially with the trample, I'm honestly surprised that this gives trample. That feels like too much for this set. That is going to end some games. And like the Oni that we talked about last episode, Gut Wrencher Oni and Painwracker Oni, the fact that those are so big and just have the ability to get damage through over or around your opponent's creatures, I think can have a really big impact. And Oni Possession is just kind of letting you turn any creature into one of those, albeit with a hefty downside.
Yeah, it's kind of funny and awkward. I feel like this thing actually wants to be in a spirit deck more than a mortals deck. Like if you think about the Zubera, this is just really good with the Zubera. Like something like Dripping Tongue Zubera that makes a 1/1 when it dies. Like this thing, I feel like plays really, really nicely with a lot of the spirits, but especially the Zubera.
I gotta say though, the art on this really bothers me.
Really? Why?
It's not the grossness that I have a problem with. You know that.
Mm-hmm. No, you're all in.
I'm all in for that. I'm all in for Oni Possession. But the idea here is that this Oni has possessed a creature, and it's killing off your other creatures, right? Presumably ending with the creature that it possessed. So it's taken over this body, and it's just kind of killing everything around it. But if you look at this art, it makes it look like the Oni is just kind of erupting from a creature that's in the process of dying, which doesn't really fit the flavor of the card. Maybe if you were sacrificing a creature and then you're getting a separate Oni token, then that would kind of fit this. But it's like, the Oni's supposed to be living in this guy for a while, ditching him. It's supposed to be killing everybody else. I'm getting worked up about this.
Yeah, no, you're right. He should be... The thing being sacrificed should be kind of like chained to it or like separate from the kind of central Oni figure here. That's a good point. Are you willing to still play this card?
Yeah, I'll still let it in, with regret.
With a strong reprimand for confusing art storytelling.
And a strongly worded letter that I'm sure I'll be writing anytime now.
Where do you rate this card? I have it as like a singleton meh. It seems like I'm not convinced it's actually good, even though I like it.
I think it is actually good. I think it's playable.
Playable, wow! But don't you feel like the 2 or 3 for 1 thing is like a super real downside?
I mean, it is, but I don't know. You know, the fact that you're getting the +3/+3 and trample, I think trample is a very big deal here. You know, I think a lot of times this is just going to end the game. And if you have enough Zuberas or whatever else out there to, you know, get through a few turns, keeping Oni Possession out, then I think you're just going to win.
I see you have a 2x here and I have a 1x. I actually have an interesting proposal for you, which is what about treating this initially as a build around where we include like 2 so that the drafters challenge is like, can you build the Oni Possession deck? What do you think about that?
It's kind of interesting. So putting it out there as a way of encouraging you to like build a deck that can support this, can make it happen. I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's almost like a challenge for us. Like, can we engineer an Oni Possession deck in? Or, you know, I might be overthinking this and we just throw one of them in and it's fine. But I kind of want to see like what it looks like to have 2 or somehow I'm now thinking 3. That's probably crazy, but just something I'm chewing on.
I think 3 is a little too much possession. But I kind of like the idea of 2.
Maybe the Oni have gotten to me.
2 build-arounds. Yeah, maybe we need to have a talk after this.
I'm feeling the need to sacrifice a creature too. So,
oh boy.
Uh-oh. Okay, let's call it a 2x build around.
Yeah.
There was a great little combo I noticed on EDH Rec I just had to share, which is this card's highest synergy rating, which for anyone who's not familiar, EDH Rec, every card has a synergy rating, meaning they look at all the cards this could be played with and they say, where does this appear unusually frequently? Or where's it unusually common for this to be paired with another card? So as an example, this might appear in a lot of other decks with Doomblade, but that's true for every black card. You know, that's Doomblade is just a staple that shows up in lots of decks. But this card's high synergy card is Harmless Offering. So Harmless Offering is donate. It gives your opponent a permanent you control. And I do think this is hilarious. So basically what happens is you donate it to your opponent. You get to keep the +3/+3 and trample on your creature because it's enchanting your creature still. And then they get the Abyss like for the rest of the game, unless they can your creature. They're just sacking a creature every turn. And meanwhile, you're benefiting. And that is really cute. I really like that.
Oh, wow. That's fun. That's some high level.
Yeah, play. I wish we could do that in here, but it seems really fun. Yeah. All right, 2x build around.
All right, so I need to apologize for all the confusion that I'm sowing here because we did not talk about Painwracker Oni last episode. And the reason for that is that we're talking about Painwracker Oni now. And it starts with a P. Painwracker Oni is a 3 BB 5/4 demon spirit with fear. And he says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature if you don't control an ogre. So this is obviously a very strong card, has some real game-ending power with that fear in there. But I think he's actually kind of less good than his gut-wrenching cousin because his drawback is so much worse. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think his drawback is substantially worse than the Gut-Wrencher Oni's. So Gut-Wrencher Oni, again, requires you to discard a card at the beginning of your upkeep. So discarding a card is just generally less bad than sacking creature, right? You've had to put money or mana into casting the creature, so you're at a greater, you're both a tempo and a card disadvantage at that point. And the other thing is, once you're hellbent, the Gut-Wrencher Oni doesn't say, or does he? Does he require you? Does he die when you run out of cards? No. So yeah, weirdly, the Gut-Wrencher Oni is kind of just fine once you're hellbent. So he sticks around and he's still awesome. Whereas Painwracker will eventually destroy himself. And that is a much more substantial downside.
Yeah, I think that's really the tipping point there is that you can just run out of cards to discard and it's fine. And you're probably not that sad about it because you have a 5/4 trampler out. But Painwracker will kill himself.
Yeah, and you don't even have to be hellbent forever with the Gut-Wrencher because, upkeep comes before draw. So you can discard the non-existent card in your hand and then draw and then cast the thing. So it's a much more manageable downside.
Yeah, that's a good point.
From a design perspective, too, I also like the Gut-Wrencher more. Trample is still very strong, but not as uninteractive as Fear. And I'm a little bit scared of Fear on a 2-mana 2/1, but I'm quite scared of Fear on a 5-power creature. Like, that is maximum a 4-turn clock. That is just on something that's essentially unblockable. That's pretty annoying. Yeah. I still think we include this though, right? This pair is so iconic.
Yeah, I think he's an auto include for me. Yeah, look at this flavor text. It says blood flows, blood calls, blood devours all, and only blood remains. Ogre chant. They are seriously into blood.
Yeah, I feel like, we learned in flavor text on some other cards that the ogres haven't always worshipped the Oni. It's something that's come to them sort of recently as a corruption. And I got to question their judgment. Like when you saw the Oni introduce this chant of blood flows, blood calls, blood devours all, and only blood remains. Like that seems like a pretty clear signal you should find a different object of worship. Like that's not a cult you want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to end well.
Yeah, I don't get what the ogres are thinking. Just poor judgment. All right, but I still think this is an auto include, right? 1x?
Definitely.
All right, let's go to Pull Under. This is your classic expensive removal spell. Pull Under, 5 and a black for an instant arcane. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. So really straightforward. I think this card is quite good. The raid here is obviously terrible, but I think this card plays better than it looks. The format is super slow. Costing only a single designated black is big game. Because this is a 6-drop, you can totally throw this into, I think, a deck that otherwise doesn't play any black cards, and it'll be fine and castable much of the time. And this is pretty close to unconditional removal. We're going to talk about this sort of iconic removal duo of Rend Spirit and Rend Flesh soon. But those are conditional, whereas this kills, by my math, 325 out of 336 creatures in the block, which is to say 97% of creatures in the block die to this thing. I think this card's pretty real.
I was kind of stumped by this, honestly. It is one of Black's only unconditional removal options, as you said, but it costs 6. It can hit all the biggest creatures, pretty much, including the dragons and the Myojin, because it gets around indestructibility, but it costs 6. It's an arcane instant, but it costs 6.
Yeah, but don't you feel like a lot of the time you're not happy about that, but you're going to eventually get to 6 in most games, and you're going to be happy that you had this card?
Yeah, that's very true.
Now, admittedly, against, say, the white deck, like the weenie decks, I don't think this is quite good enough. You will often be kind of close to dead and like killing one of their things. Like, so this against like a 2-mana threat is terrible, right? That's like, oh, wow, I really lost so much tempo there, and it's already hit me 3 times. But I think, if you're both mid-range or if you're both slower decks, I think this card's pretty good. I don't think it's quite to auto-include, but I do think it's a solid playable.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
There is one factor that cuts against its playability, Connor, which is that the art here is just beyond disgusting.
Yeah, it is truly nasty.
How do I even describe it? It's like it's an Arachi, it's a snake person being sort of pulled apart by like a bunch of like body horror, purple worm spine creatures. Like it's just super, super gross.
Well, he's being pulled under
and apart.
It was an interesting artistic decision to have the thing being pulled under be an Orochi, like a snake person that already has 4 arms, because there's so many limbs going on in this picture already, and then you add more by having this guy have 4 arms.
Yeah, you just can't tell what's going on. It's just confusing.
Yeah. And it feels like so this is Ron Spencer art, and he has really kind of like poppy, high contrast, like heavy color, heavy shadow sort of art style. So you've got that going on, and then it feels like he just sort of let loose with kind of every sort of monstrous body part he could fit into here. We've got tentacles, we've got claws, there's maybe some eyeballs somewhere in here, and they're just all like, just they want this snake man gone.
Yeah, and he did. There's his other black card in the set, Soulless Revival, is like very similar. It's all purple and tentacly and super disgusting. And I don't know why this has to look like this. It's just so gross.
Yeah, that does kind of weigh against it.
Yeah, I mean, I just honestly don't want it in the deck. That said, I think this is, to me, a playable, and I feel like 2 of them is the right number. What about you?
Yeah, I think you're right on 2. I feel more like meh, because there are going to be so many times when, maybe you end up using this on a 2-drop and you feel pretty sad about it, but it's still removal at the end of the day.
Yeah, this will get pointed at a lot of Kitsune Blade Masters, that's for sure.
Oh boy. Okay, well, yeah, now that you said him again, I'm going to bump this up to playable.
Well, but it's not very good against the Blade Master though, right? Because they paid 3 and you paid 6, and they probably domed you with them 3 times.
I mean, in my mind, anything that gets rid of the Blade Master is good against the Blade Master.
That card is so real. Like I know we keep returning to him, but he just comes in on 3 every time when your opponent's in white, and you're always like, nah, no, what do I do?
It just hurts so much. You hate to see it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing premium removal at, which is quite a compliment for just a basically gray ogre with upside.
Okay, yeah, I'm willing to call it playable 2x.
All right.
This next guy I don't think is going to quite get there. This is Rag Dealer. B for a 1/1 human rogue. You can pay 2B and tap him to remove up to 3 target cards in a single graveyard from the game. When would you want to have this guy? Like, what is the deck or the situation where you want a Rag Dealer?
It's a fully art-based deck, and you say, this art is banging good. It's some kind of cool fairy tale guy, and you don't care about playability.
That's his niche.
That's his only niche. No, I hate this card. I calculated what percentage through the block we are, and we are, as of Rag Dealer, 22.22% through the block. And I'm honestly already done talking about 1/1s. Like, there are too many 1/1s in this block, and this is one, like, I don't want to give this guy any screen time. This card sucks.
Even the art, like as kind of cool and spooky as the art is generally, it doesn't really match the name of the card. Like, he's called Rag Dealer, but this guy who's sort of, holding a lantern and walking through the swamps of Takenuma, he's got a lantern in one hand, and then in the other hand, he's got this big axe.
That's a great point. Where is rags?
I don't see any rags. Like, where are the rags that he's dealing?
You're totally right. This guy should have a big, huge backpack overflowing with rags or some kind of ill-gotten material. And you're right that the axe is confusing. And no 1-power creature can have an axe that big.
Yeah. And like, what's the effect? Are you trading dead bodies to this guy in exchange for rags? Like, how does rag dealing have anything to do with?
I think he's like robbing graves in search of stuff, and he's disrupting the graves, and that leads to them being exiled. I don't know, Connor.
And then he's getting rags from that.
Yeah, the flavor text further confuses things, because the flavor text says, after General Takeno found the Oathkeeper amidst the bamboo marshes, more scavengers braved the swamps Nezumi, Oni, and Kami in hopes of glory. The history of Kamigawa. Which is a nice little bit of storytelling about the Oathkeeper, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense for this, because this guy doesn't seem like he's in search of glory. This guy's in search of, like, rags. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, the elements aren't quite all coming together on this guy.
Can we just cut it and move on?
Yeah, we've talked about this long enough.
Let's turn to the other card with rag in its name in the set. Strangely.
Ooh.
I know. It's not actually rag. Ragged Veins, 1 and a B for an enchantment aura, enchant creature, flash. Whenever enchanted creature is dealt damage, its controller loses that much life. This is a weird card. It's kind of hard to evaluate for me. I don't think it does that much, really. If you think of putting this on, I don't know, like 2 bears that are trading, basically that's like 2 mana, your opponent loses 2 life. That's okay.
Are the bears trading rags with each other?
Yeah, well, let's take that scenario. So we've got 2 rag dealers, one of whom has Ragged Veins. Who wins?
That's too much rag.
Too much rag. I don't know. What do you think of this card? I feel like it's kind of mad. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it really does a lot either. It's kind of like just a card.
I'm more excited about it than you are. I think it is really easy to overlook, but at the same time because it has flash, it could translate into, basically 2 mana, deal 5 damage to your opponent, or however much. Like, this can turn a chump block of one of your big creatures into a lot of damage to the face. It kind of makes something like Kitsune Blademaster look a
you
lot
said
less
it.
attractive.
Hold on. Keep going. Tell me why.
So if you put Ragged Veins on Kitsune Blademaster, and your opponent is using the Blademaster to just sort of, shut you down and block over and over, you make him a lot less good.
Kitsune Blademaster has first strike. He doesn't take damage because he has godlike power.
Oh, I hate him so much.
By the way, listeners, we promise we do read the cards.
We do read the cards. We have played this game. We know what first strike does.
But yeah, if we I think that was just bad luck on your part picking the Blademaster. I get what you mean. Like, this makes your opponent's threats a little less effective and starts creating awkward decisions for them.
Yeah. So there's that. I do really love this art also.
Oh, it's so good. Talk about it.
So it shows a woman sitting kind of on this fallen log or tree branch or something in the swamps. She's wearing this very elegant, kind of delicate, flowing robe. Her hair is done in this very elaborate manner. She looks like nobility, and she's sitting just in the middle of the swamp for some reason. And all of these red tendrils, these veins are, it looks like, coming out of the tree and wrapping themselves around her and sort of spiraling out behind her. And there's,
that's interesting.
it doesn't make a lot of sense, like just looking at it. You can't figure out what's going on, but it seems sinister and threatening. Okay, now you can talk.
Sir, I'm fascinated because your read is very different than mine. So I've been looking at this card for years, and I read this as her veins are being like extracted from her body.
Ugh.
And that's why she's suffering pain. That's why they're not like really directly connected to the tree in all cases. So that's interesting that we've had two such different interpretations.
Yeah, I like yours. It's a lot more sinister and gross.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I'm with you. This art is like, what I like about this card versus, say, Pull Under is that it's really creepy and unsettling without resorting to being like just generically gross. It's like, it's subtle, and I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, the difference between like a good, sinister, like unsettling horror movie and something like Saw, right? Where like the horror here is coming from the lack of explanation, your inability to sort of figure out what's going on. That there's some danger, that something bad is happening, but you can't figure out what it is.
Yeah, like, and the contrast between the sort of tranquility of her mood and the face and kind of the setting, which is also quite tranquil, and then the obviously sinister activity of these red tendrils is really, really effective.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that you and I both love this card and had very different interpretations of the art for many years, like, further speaks to that. Like, it does have a kind of subtle creepiness that's really cool.
Yeah. So we got to have two of these in, right?
Yeah, we can start with two.
Just on art value?
Yeah, I'm willing to put it at playable 2 for art equity, although I'm kind of I'm skeptical that it'll stay with both those things all the way to the end.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Okay, next up we've got Rend Flesh. This is 2B for an instant arcane. Destroy target non-spirit creature. Super simple, straightforward removal. Fits right into all of the themes of Kamigawa. It's an arcane spell. It destroys a non-spirit creature, so it's obviously a spirit is rending the flesh of a mortal here. I can't see any situation where we would cut this.
Can't imagine a scenario where we cut this, or spoiler alert, Rend Spirit. I think it's pretty obvious both these are getting in. I think they're easy auto include. So I think really the question, outside of talking about flavor and design here, I think the only question is how many of these we put in.
So it sounds like we're both landing on auto include here.
Yep. The
number that I was feeling was 2 copies, and I noticed you put 3.
Yeah, I vacillated on this a little bit. So I went to 3 because I've been thinking about, we did a fair number at this point of triple champions test drafts. And something that jumps out at me as I do that is that removal is scarce in this format, except in black, which is just stuffed to the gills with really, really good removal. Like, just at common in this set, we've got Befoul, Pull Under, Rend Flesh, and Rend Spirit. So like fully 4 out of 22 of black's commons are pretty premium removal spells. And so like the block has got a lot of pretty solid removal, albeit expensive, but still there's a lot of removal running around.
So wouldn't that mean we want fewer copies of this removal?
Well, so I guess what I'm thinking is that we want, having a bunch of all of them feels like a big part of black's color pie. I could see 3 being too many, but I don't know that it is, honestly. I feel like in part, I feel like you need them because the other colors have so little removal. Like black has to do the heavy lifting of like being a way to kill things. Like, so here's an example. If you're in the black deck, you can't count on a Rend Flesh going later than, second, third, fourth pick, right? Because like, I feel like other decks are just going to pick one up and splash black just to get a little bit of removal in, because there just isn't any in the format.
Yeah, I mean, I could see 3 copies of this. We'll just have to see like how much removal is going to be too much for black, because it does have a lot of options and the other colors have essentially none. And it's already a strong color, even setting the removal aside. But then again, we're not really trying to go for a cube that's perfectly balanced between all of the colors. I don't think that's really possible or desirable with what red is like in this.
Yeah, maybe from a numbers perspective, but from a like a power perspective, yeah, I don't know if I don't think it's possible to create an original Kamigawa block cube that brings red up to the level of black, for example.
Yeah.
So maybe before we settle this numbers question, I actually want to do a little bit of comparing between this and Rend Spirit. We can do a full review of Rend Spirit in a second, but in terms of power, so Rend Spirit, for anyone who doesn't know, is just this card, but for spirits. So Rend Spirit is 2B, instant, destroy target spirit. I feel like on power level, Rend Spirit is the slightly better of the two because the spirits tend to be bigger and more late gamey, whereas this, occasionally has to trade down in terms of mana. I think they're both good, but I think Rend Spirit is slightly more powerful. But that's counterbalanced by it having way, way, way worse art and terrible flavor text.
Definitely agree on that. And I will say for Rend Flesh, though, unlike our last card, Ragged Veins, Rend Flesh does deal with Kitsune Blade Master.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big plus.
That's pretty essential. I agree.
How many of these do you think? Should we go with 3, I guess?
I kind of like 3. I think it's possible we end up just feeling like we're swimming in black removal, but we can always cull it down.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one thing I'll point out about both these is I like that Rend Flesh and Rend Spirit are not Doomblades and they're not terrors, that they don't exclude black creatures. As we mentioned a few times with Fear and stuff, I'm not really a huge fan of that kind of color-based play patterns. And while these have very significant and real downsides, the reality is most decks, at least in a limited context, are running both mortal and spirit creatures. And so you almost always have something to point it at. So I appreciate the way these are designed.
Yeah, and I like the kind of, symmetrical design of both of these and how they, fit really well into the flavor and the like overarching theme of spirits and mortals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really do a good job selling it for sure. I'll read the flavor text on this one because in part because I like it, but mostly because I want to be able to dunk on Rend Spirit's flavor text in a minute. So the flavor text on this is: the Reito massacre was a testament to the Kami's unstoppable power. The human defenders might as well have been moths battling a forest fire. Great battles of Kamigawa. So I mostly want to bring this up to say the Reito massacre was a big old massacre where the spirits killed everybody, and the resulting trauma is what led to the birth of Hirobi Death's Whale. So just a little bit of trivia there for you.
There you go. And we all love Hirobi.
Oh yeah, we love Hirobi, and therefore we love the Reito massacre. It's one of my favorite massacres.
We're on record.
Oh dear.
With that. Oh boy.
All right. Auto included 3?
Yeah.
Okay, I suspect Rend Spirit is going to be a pretty similar discussion. Just as a quick refresher, 2 and a B, instant, destroy target spirit. As I said, I think Rend Flesh is a little bit better, but this card's art is terrible, and I don't like that. The spirit in this, I guess it's the spirit. It kind of just looks like a goofy knockoff monster from a knockoff Aliens movie or something. I think this art is really boring and lame.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. Though, now that I'm looking kind of more closely at the art, the spirit and mortal in both pieces seem to be the same.
Oh, you're right. That is a great catch. That's very cool.
Okay, I like this a little better now. I had a major complaint about this art, Rend Spirit, because it's a black card. It's showing a mortal, I guess, rending a spirit, but the human shown in this art is like blasting this Kami with some kind of yellow glowy magic that definitely looks...
It's clearly using white magic.
Yes, it should be on a white card. And the flavor text, I'll go ahead and read the flavor text on this one. The battle at Ganzan Pass was a testament to human endurance. The untrained and frightened group escaped 3 legions of Kami, leaving more than their share of slain foes in their wake. Like, that is not black card flavor text. Like, themes of human endurance, camaraderie.
Yeah.
Like, wrong color here. And the art, wrong color.
That's a good point. And the other thing, there's like a little thing in that flavor text I think is kind of lame, which is it says escaped 3 legions of Kami. And I find that kind of jarring too, of like, what does that mean? Like, are the Kami organized in legions? Like, everything else in the block leads me to think of them as kind of, they're more like monsters, right? But like something in there is like, there's something I don't quite get.
Yeah, how do you count a legion of Kami? How are they organized?
Yeah, maybe it's a legion like quantity now I think about it. I don't know.
How much is that?
Hey Siri, how many Kami are in 3 legions of Kami? All right. Anything else to say about Rend Spirit?
What did she say? I just barely heard.
I couldn't hear it. She was babbling something about getting directions to somewhere.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, she's working on it. She's going to bring you to the Kami, or she's bringing them to
Oh
you.
no! I hope she's not bringing me to the Rieto massacre.
Yeah, you better lock the door.
Oof. 3 of these again?
Yeah, I think so. And auto include.
All right,
for sure.
Yeah, I'm a little worried I'm being too blasé about throwing this much removal in, but we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll see if it's a problem. Okay, next up, definitely not a problem. Scuttling Death. 4B for 4/2 Spirit. You can sack it to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. And it has Soul Shift 4. I feel like this is kind of a tough one to evaluate. Like, it looks really bad on its face. 5 mana, 4/2 with, a really measly sacrifice effect. But I feel like it's tricky to weigh this in Kamigawa because Scuttling Death is at this kind of 4-power break point where it can trade with a lot of things that have 4 toughness. And with that -1/-1, it can, even trade up to something with 5. It's got the Soul Shift, so it's getting some kind of value for you there.
Yeah.
But it just looks so bad. And the art just looks so awful and disgusting too.
We've talked about a couple gross ones. We've talked about Pull Under. We've talked about, I don't know, last episode, a bunch of gross things. But this might take the cake. It's like some kind of brain oyster mushroom cockroach monster. It's just super gross.
Now that you said oyster, I can't unsee that.
Yeah, it's making me like oysters even less.
Yeah, and it's got like sort of toes and these.
That's right. It's even got toes. It's like, what's the grossest part of the human body? Toes are pretty gross. Like, it's just like a potpourri of grossness here.
It really is.
Yeah, I don't know what inspired Thomas Boxa to go this hard on nastiness, but I don't like it.
Maybe he was just kind of Googling like nasty things in nature and, made like a collage of all those images and came up with this.
He made like a mood board of gross things and just kind of sat there and percolated on it.
Yeah, he just sort of stared at all of those and he's like, yeah, Scuttling Death.
Before we review this, can I just shock you by telling you this got reprinted in Modern Masters 2015?
What?
I know. It's inexplicable.
For what?
I have no idea. I genuinely couldn't tell you.
With Soul Shift and everything? What?
Yeah. I think there was like a minor kind of Kamigawa type theme in there, but still pretty hard to understand.
Wow. That's bizarre.
Playability on this one's funny. I mean, it looks terrible, not just aesthetically, but play-wise. But I think you're right that this punches a little above its weight. It's a 4/2 that, with damage on the stack, basically blocks or attacks as a 5-power creature or trades as a 5-power creature, and that's not impossibly bad. And Soul Shift 4 is pretty meaningful. I don't think there's too many other Soul Shifters who occupy this part on the curve. The only other one I could think of is that terrible 5-drop green spider we'll get to later on. I feel like I don't like this card, but I think it's probably fine, and we should put 1 or 2 in it. Meh.
Yeah, I definitely agree on Matt. I think just one of these guys is going to be enough.
Yeah.
He can just kind of scuttle in there every now and then, and you go, yeah, okay, we'll try it.
Yeah, that way at least once the pack is gone, you won't have to look at it again, hopefully.
Exactly. Until you play it.
I like your 1. Meh 1. Let's go to Seizan, Perverter of Truth. 3 BB for a legendary demon spirit. 6/5. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses 2 life and draws 2 cards. Now that is a 5-drop spirit. I love, incidentally, the contrast from Scuttling Death to Seizan, because one of them is almost impossible to get excited about, whereas I feel like this guy just instantly gets my my brain churning. You read it and you go, wow, that's a big creature. Oh, but it has a drawback. Oh, but is that actually even a drawback, or is that just furthering the things that you already want to do when you're beating down with a 6/5, which is to say you want to cement your advantage and you want to like drain your opponent out as quickly as possible? I feel like this guy is really, really good.
I agree. I think that his upkeep or like Oni blood sacrifice effect, like, it's good for you. You want to be drawing cards, but it can kind of also be good for your opponent. So unlike most of the other Oni, Seizan triggers at every player's upkeep, which means that the first turn that happens after you play it is going to be your opponent's turn when they're losing 2 life and drawing 2 cards, which could potentially help them out quite a bit. And that's something I hadn't really thought about very much until I played him against you in one of our playtest games. And I was like, wait a second, he's drawing the cards first.
Yeah, but in the end, it didn't matter, did it? Because you had a 6/5,
No,
and I was down on life, and it was just you had a Sulfuric Vortex out that was also a 6/5. What do you do?
Yeah, he super strong, super good.
Yeah, and especially because I feel like black is in a pretty good position to be aggressive. As we've seen, there's a couple solid aggressive 2-drops. There's some decent aggressive 3-drops. I feel like, the black can really beat down in this set.
I like that Seizan also is a little bit like Hirobi. It's overpowered for its cost of 5 mana, 6/5. And it has this ability that could be helpful or could be harmful depending on the circumstances and sort of, depending on what the game state is like. I think usually, you're going to take this drawback happily. But I do like that there's sort of this interesting symmetrical effect going on with both of those.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to your which was the Nezumi flip card who makes you discard. Nezumi Shortfang, he's got a similar kind of thing of he leads to interesting games. They can be frustrating, you're like, oh man, I'm just getting wrecked by this thing, and that's rough. But I think he's fun. And the fact that you're drawing the cards is kind of interesting too, because unlike Sulfuric Vortex, is are there any outs I'm drawing to? It creates a lot of interesting tense moments for everybody.
Yeah.
And how about this art?
Yeah, it's another one by Kev Walker, who brought us the Black Myojin and also He Who Hungers. Seizan seems to be mostly a big Oni skull with this giant mouth, this big kind of death mask grin that stretches all around the sides of the head. It's got this big set of horns on top. I think just barely you can see that third Oni eye right above these giant nostrils in the middle of the skull. And then sort of limbs coming out from beside this oversized skull, and then these, I guess, teeny little legs in the back. And it just looks like this really creepy, horrifying. It doesn't really look particularly like a demon or an Oni at first glance, but it has these cool details and these creepy little elements in there.
Yeah, I've been really impressed by how Kev kept his pretty photorealistic style in this set, and yet managed to turn out some really cool, fantastical creatures. I feel like Kev Walker was really turning in some great work. Where do you have this? I have this as an auto include. I think mostly just because I really like it. It's one of my favorite cards from the set, so I have him as an auto include 1X.
Yeah, I had him as playable, but I think you're right that he's auto include.
Okay,
I think I rated it as playable before I actually played it.
Before you wrecked me with it.
Before I wrecked you with Seizan. So yeah, I'll go up to auto include.
And I think this actually is also an example where it's maybe not bad to have a bunch of removal running around in this format, because there's a bunch of lame 2 and 3 drop creatures here that are oh, it's a bear. But then there's a lot of, random 5-drop bombs like this guy or Moloku that really must be answered quickly or the game's just over.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting way of putting it. Kind of crap at the bottom and then bombs like this guy, and not a lot of creatures in the middle. There are not a lot of sort of mid-value, mid-range types of creatures. I guess maybe Kitsune Blademaster would fit in there.
You kind of jump from the Scuttling Deaths to the Seizans and Dragons with not a huge amount of mid-tier creatures in between.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many of these bombs actually turn up when people are drafting the cube, and how reliably you can kind of get one into your deck. Because I could see, situations coming up where you're looking for that bomb to kind of tie everything together and give you something to end the game, and you just kind of end up with a deck of Scuttling Deaths while your opponent picks up 3 Spirit Dragons.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think I almost feel like it's going to push us in one of 2 directions. You either push it towards there being a lot of the chaff so that no player's picking up more than 1 or 2 of these bombs, and it's mostly chaff, but with the, a couple of bombs in your deck, or you cut a lot of the chaff and you lean into the bomby creatures. My guess is it's more the first, because I think that The problem is there's not bomby 3-drops really. It's like at 5s. I feel like it would be a weird environment if you lean too hard into the bomby creatures.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Usual EDH rec report. Seizan commands 348 decks, which is not a lot. I'm not really surprised that it's low because at the end of the day, he's like a 5-mana 6/5 that does kind of a symmetrical thing. But I feel like that's a little bit of a pity because it's a pretty fun effect in EDH. It's kind of a political, interesting, dynamic to give your opponents cards in life and see how everyone interprets that. Do they interpret that as a hostile thing or a friendly thing?
He's getting a lot of love in our cube, if not in Commander.
There you go.
Let's talk about Soulless Revival. We teased this a little bit earlier, but here it is. Soulless Revival, 1B for an instant arcane. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and you can splice it onto arcane for 1B. So this is the gross successor to Pull Under. Pull Under, of course, showed the snake person being, dragged down by these horrible appendages. And Soulless Revival is the sequel where someone else is being dragged up by a bunch of horrible appendages.
Don't know why Ron Spencer felt like he had to do this to us.
They are so. I mean, even the guy being pulled up is kind of gross.
I know, why is he got to be so gross? I get the tentacle. I mean, I know he's dead, I guess, but yeah, he's all bulgy and liney and contrasty. He's just really gross.
Yeah, when Ron Spencer wants to, he can really make a nasty piece of art.
He's turned up the disgust dial here.
Yeah. I will say, though, that I think this card is pretty much right at home in the black Soul Shift deck. Really good one to splice, I think, and kind of a rare splice card in that it doesn't cost more to splice than it does to just play it. It's 2 mana either way, and I think you could get quite a bit of value out of this if you're reviving your Seizan.
I was more torn on it because I feel like the problem is that the black Soul Shift deck already has a lot of creatures with Soul Shift, and so I don't know how much, do you need Soulless Revival in that case, or do you already have plenty of ways to buy back creatures from your graveyard?
I mean, you might, but there's a lot of ones that are going to be really tough to get back with Soul Shift, like Seizan, like the Myojin that you're not going to be playing. Painwracker Oni, 5 mana. These more expensive, like bomb cards are going to be, I think, really hard to get back with Soul Shift because there's just not that many cards that have that high of a Soul Shift.
Okay, I'm mostly persuaded by that. I still think this is I suspect it's not going to play as well as it looks, but I think it at least it's fun or interesting. I feel like black is just killing it. Almost every one of these cards is fun or interesting, or just I enjoy thinking about them, except for the art.
We can think about them. It doesn't mean we have to look at them.
How many of these would you include then if you're pretty high on it?
I lean toward having 2 of them at playable.
It's funny. I also had it at playable and 2. I feel like you have it as a high playable and 2, and I have it as low playable and 2, but we still landed in the same place somehow.
Yeah, we both ended up on playable 2.
All right, that sounds easy. I've also been, while we've been talking, just scrolling through Ron Spencer's art on Scryfall, and I'm realizing he just specializes in gross. Like, many of the grossest cards are Ron Spencer cards, like Cabal Therapy, the original art, which might be one of the grossest arts in the game, Bone Shredder, Bog Rats. Like, I think this is kind of what he does, is endless cockroaches, which is absolutely as gross as it sounds.
I mean, you don't even need to look at that to know how gross it's going to be.
Yeah. So I guess Wizards turns to Flow of Maggots. Like, he has a type. God, Flow of Maggots. All right.
Flow of Maggots.
I know. I'm sorry, readers or listeners. Yeah. Don't look it up.
Usually we would tell you to go look at the art, but in this case, we'll say just don't.
I don't know why you would. All right, you know what? I'm going to ask you for a live reaction card. I'm going to send you Flow of Maggots and Endless Cockroaches, and I want you to tell me which one, in your opinion, is more disgusting.
Okay, there's Flow of Maggots. Look at that fly on there.
I know. It's like the maggots aren't enough. We got to get a fly on there as well. Okay, and then Endless Cockroaches.
So many legs.
I know.
Wow.
Let's both say as close to simultaneously. So my choice is
Flow of Maggots.
Okay, me too. It's so gross.
Yeah, they're just wriggling around in there. All right, I'm gonna tell a gross story. Cut this out if you have to.
Oh no. Oh.
But a few years ago, I lived in Beaverton, Oregon, and we had, municipal compost bins there. So you put all your yard debris in the bin, you can put your kitchen scraps in the yard debris bin, you can put it all in there and it'll get taken away and composted. And I decided that we were going to try doing a little bit of home compost, but I didn't bother looking into like any of the many rules you're supposed to follow in making your own compost at home. So what I did was put everything into that bin that could possibly decompose at some point in my lifetime, which included meat, quite a bit of meat, quite a bit of table scraps, cooked and uncooked, oil, all kinds of stuff, all going in this big green municipal bin of compost. And compost is supposed to be pretty warm, right? Like you want it to get up to a good temp, get it to cook. So I put it in the backyard under the sun and just kind of forgot about it for a while. And I went out there probably after a week or two of having not checked on it and opened it up to see how things were going. And I could only describe what was in there as a flow of maggots. There were so many of them, and I had never seen, I'd seen maybe like one or two maggots at a time before then. And this was just like, this bin was loaded with them. And of course, I open it up, all these flies are coming out because some of the maggots grow up, as you'll see in Flow of Maggots, the card. So they're just writhing in there. And I had to spend probably the next 6 to 7 hours cleaning that up.
Oh, wow.
Not a good day.
Listeners, if I haven't cut this out, my apologies. I think really you should blame Ron Spencer rather than Connor.
Yes, please.
Because this is just this is the intense reaction his art provokes.
Oh, God, why did you send mine maggots?
I know, I was scrolling through his art to try to distract from your story, and it got even worse. It's like every piece gets grosser.
Okay, that is the worst. He just digs maggots.
He has like 3 pieces that involve far too many disgusting insects or predecessors to insects.
I gotta stop looking at that.
Okay, all right. Are we still going to put 2 of these in after the trauma we've suffered and inflicted on our listeners?
Yeah, I think we better.
Okay, this next card seems really appropriate title-wise.
That's right in.
Let's talk about Struggle for Sanity. Struggle for Sanity is 2 BB for sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. That player sets aside a card from it. Then you set aside a card from it. Repeat this process until all cards in that hand have been set aside. That player returns the cards they set aside to their hand and puts the rest into their graveyard. So I think we've talked a couple times about my love for Fact or Fiction and Gonti and these kind of like little mini game kind of effects. And so I think you would think I would love this, but I don't like this card at all. The first reason is that I don't like my opponents to have this level of agency. I want to be the ones making the decisions. But that's not just because I'm a jerk. I think genuinely in the case of this card, it is a serious problem for its playability. Like your opponent really gets to make the important calls here. And I think at the end of the day, you take maybe one important card out of their hand. It's just, I don't think this card is very good.
Totally agree. I feel exactly the opposite as you do about Fact or Fiction type cards. So I'm already going into this one not liking it, but I completely agree with you that the fact that this lets your opponent choose first what they're going to keep and what's going to be discarded, I think makes it really, really bad.
Like, let's say your opponent somehow has 5 cards in hand, which, let's be honest, when you're casting a 4-mana spell is by no means guaranteed. So they'll set aside a card, then you will, then they will, then you will, then they will. So they'll discard only 2 cards total. So basically they'll discard their second best and second worst cards. Like, that is not really that meaningful an outcome. Like, that's basically a mind rot. Like, it's like very slightly better than mind rot. I don't think this card is good.
Yeah, especially when you think about like Distress that we talked about last episode, just 2 mana to be able to choose what you're going to force your opponent to discard. Half the cost of this, and it lets you choose first.
And it comes down on 2 potentially when there's, like many more meaningful decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is just an insta-cut.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty easy insta-cut for me.
And we can move on to another gross card, Swallowing Plague. XBB For a sorcery arcane, Swallowing Plague deals X damage to target creature, and you gain X life. I'm really getting tired of all the bugs in this set and all of our bug discussion, even though I've been bringing most of it. We've got this, we've got Pull Under, we've got Soulless Revival. The mortals are bringing us Befoul, Distress. Like, there are a lot of bugs and tentacles and writhing things
Yes,
in
entirely
this
too
color.
many.
I think that's the biggest drawback, maybe the only drawback of black in this set compared to the other colors is just the art is so grody.
I am grateful they didn't give Ron Spencer this art because while Dave Durman's art here is a little bit gross, I think if you'd given the name Swallowing Plague to Ron Spencer, I shudder to think what he would have
I don't want to think about that. Well, if you look at just the volume of bugs in this piece of art, there's not that many of them. You know, they're kind of like scarabby looking beetle type things. Not that gross.
Yeah, exactly. Scarabs aren't that bad. They're kind of like scarab, scorpion, horse crab, shrew crabs, which, I don't like that, but
that's fine.
I feel like if Ron had these, they would have been purple and bulging.
Yes. And there would have been about 100 times as many of them.
Oh man, this is a really gross episode. I feel like I need to keep apologizing.
Oh, we need to like put a warning in the show notes or something. The card itself, I think, is okay.
Huh. Okay.
You know, it's not super exciting. It sucks that it's a sorcery, but, you know, it's a way to get rid of a big threat in the late game when you have enough mana to do that. And it, you know, gives you a big life swing at the same time. It's arcane too. So I feel like it's fine.
Fine-ish. The double B here is a little bit rough because it's not splashable in the way. Like I was coming to the defense of Pull Under earlier. This is not Pull Under because of the double black. I think that's very meaningful downside. You know, you compare it to something like Battle at the Bridge, which admittedly is a much more modern card, but still, or Black Sun Zenith. Like this is pretty pricey for what it does at sorcery speed with double black and only hitting creatures. Like I don't think this card is that good. The one thing I think that does make me consider it is I like the life gain. There's not a ton of life gain in this set, really. And there is a lot of grindy gameplay. And so I do think killing a thing and gaining some decent amount of life back is something, I guess.
I think that's a big part of what makes Devouring Greed pretty good is that it, you know, creates a big life swing in part by giving you a bunch of life. And this is accomplishing half of that anyway.
I'm fine including one of it. I guess, you know, it's certainly more not certainly more interesting. It's marginally more interesting than Pull Under. So I guess I'm fine including it. And if we had to start cutting some expensive black removal, I could see half-heartedly fighting for this over Pull Under.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We're both sounding very meh about this, which is the rating we both gave it. And I think one is probably right.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is, you know, kind of a poster child for meh.
All right. Meh it up.
Let's talk about Thief of Hope. 2 and a B for a 2/2 spirit. Whenever you cast a spirit or arcane spell, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And it's got Soul Shift 2. This thing is so solid. It's a Grey Ogre that has a really nice relevant spirit craft trigger that soul shifts. Like this is everything I want in a 3-drop in black. This thing's super cool.
Yeah, great name, great card. Another piece of deceptive art where this thing looks way, way, way bigger than a 2/2, at least to me. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, he appears to be soaring over mountains.
Yeah. Like this looks like it would cover, you know, a whole continent. But it's a 2/2. It also looks like it's flying in the art and does not have flying.
Oh wow. Yeah, and honestly, I think of this card as having flying. Like when I'm not looking at it, or when I'm not looking at the text, I think, yeah, he flies because duh.
Yeah, and look at it; he's way up in the air. He's like 1,000 feet in the air. But yeah, I agree that the card is pretty great. There are not very many 3-mana spirits at all in this set, and this one I think is a really solid card to have at that slot. It's got that good spirit craft ability. Comes with Soul Shift. Like, what more could you want from a 3-drop?
Yeah, I think you can't ask much more. At least you aren't given much more. I think we discovered last time when we were looking at Kami of False Hope that this is the best black 3-drop spirit in the block. Let me go validate that. But I think this is like by far the most solid one.
I think so.
And he can block a little bit. He can trade a little bit. Just a solid card.
Yeah. I think the art just keeps me from getting excited about it more.
Yeah, I don't mind the art, honestly. I don't like the flying mist thing, but I actually I like the way it looks. I think it's creepy. You know, when you zoom in, he kind of looks very aged. He's like an aged snake yellow multi-arm monster guy. I don't know. I think it's effective and creepy. I don't know that I'd want to like giant print of it on my wall, but I think it's well executed.
Maybe we should do that once we finish the whole block, get all the episodes out there. Maybe we should celebrate by having a huge print of Thief of Hope made.
How about Pull Under? I think my wife would love a giant print of Pull Under in the dining room.
We each of us can have one of those.
Something to really whet your appetite. Yeah, there's only 2 3-drop black spirits in the block. Kami the Waning Moon and this guy definitely is better. Yeah. And hey, Soul Shift 2, that's a great way to get some Zuberas back, keep the value train going. Mm-hmm. All right, how many of these do you have? I have this as a playable, which might be too low, actually, because I think it is just such an important curve filler, and I have it at a quantity of 3.
Yeah, I landed on 3 too. I called it an auto-include just because there's so little happening at 3, at least when it comes to spirits. Like, I think he just kind of needs to be in.
Honestly, I feel like I might have been kind of sandbagging or feeling like I'm too generous to this just because it also drains, and as someone who played many in Orzhov decks over the years, I'm very sympathetic to any card that causes your opponent to lose 1 life and causes you to gain 1 life. That's one of my favorite things to do in the world.
It doesn't get much better than that.
All right, let's auto-include it at 3.
Next up, we've got Villainous Ogre, our first Ogre in a little while. Villainous Ogre is 2B for a 3/2 Ogre Warrior. Can't block. And as long as you control a demon, he has pay B to regenerate him. This is fine. I don't like him that much. I don't really hate him. He doesn't excite me very much, but he is a 3-mana creature with 3 power and, at least some potential upside if you've got a demon. And he's an ogre, so he's helping out your Oni.
Yeah, the upside here is pretty solid. Regenerate is always powerful. Although on a creature that can't block, it does go down a lot because it's like if you're at the point when you're not the one who's racing and attacking and getting in, guy basically is a blank piece of cardboard. Yep. I don't know. I feel like I mostly want this in because I want some ogres to make Painwracker and Gutwrencher Oni work, but honestly, the ogres are all pretty bad, so I'm worried I'm just getting too fixated on that kind of magical Christmas land scenario rather than recognizing like,
yeah,
maybe Gutwrencher and Painwracker can stand on their own, and if they can't, we still shouldn't be putting in bad ogres just to make them work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says something that when we were talking at least about Gutwrencher, Painwracker, I think there's a few other Oni that'll be coming up that have like a ogre-based downside. When we were talking about those cards, we didn't really say, oh, this would be so much better if you had an ogre out or if you could get that ogre. Like, they're just good, even with the drawback. And like the ogre is just gravy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of increasingly down on this guy. There even are a few other ogres that are better. Like, I think our Bloodthirsty and Bloodspeaker from earlier are probably better. I think Ogre Marauder coming up later is better in black. I think Takanuma Bleeder coming up in the next set is better in black. So, I mean, there's even some decent black ogres that I think I'd rather have than this guy.
Yeah. We got some red ogres too.
That's right. We got. Honestly, I didn't even read them as I was scrolling here because I just assumed they weren't good. Yeah. But hopefully, I'm wrong about at least 1 or 2 of them.
Maybe.
I mean, I know one we're definitely counting out, but we won't spoil that. We won't spoil that great discussion.
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want? So I had this at a meh 1x just because I thought, fine, we'll put 1 in. I don't know that I feel any real conviction about that.
So I had him as a meh 2x because I feel like, hear me out here. I feel like if he's a 1x, then he shows up a little bit like Scuttling Death, and you're just kind of, but probably worse than Scuttling Death. And you're just kind of thinking like, what's this doing here? Like, why would I want this card ever? But if you have 2 of them, then it's a little bit more like, here's your ogres for the Oni synergy.
Mm-hmm. Here's your villainous team.
Yeah. So if you already have some Oni, or if you're hoping for it,
2 3-drops that can't block.
I mean,
I feel like at that point it's like can't block tribal between this and the Nezumi Cutthroat.
That's part of Black's color identity.
Is there a card later that's like creatures you control that can't block can block?
I would love to see that text. I'm sure we wouldn't be able to read that one correctly to save our lives.
No, we'd never have a hope of reading it or understanding
No.
it. They should print one of those, kind of like, Dora on the Siege Tower or something, just but much lamer, like a really lame.
Yes.
I guess it is an inverse kind of Dora on the Siege Tower, right? Instead of letting your walls attack, this guy lets the not blockers block.
Yeah, that's power.
Hold on, I gotta go start working on
Yeah.
this for the custom card subreddit. People are gonna love it. We can put 2 in if you want, Connor. I feel like we've talked about a lot of better 3-drops this episode alone, but we can stick it in.
Yeah. Let's put a couple in and see how we feel.
All right, sure. We're getting close to the end of this episode, which hopefully hasn't felt like a Waking Nightmare. Waking Nightmare is 2 and a B for a sorcery arcane. Target player discards 2 cards. I don't really like this. This is Mind Rot, right? It's a card that's appeared in a bajillion sets in some form or another in limited. It's always just on the edge of being sort of okay. And I suspect it is in this set, and I don't like it. I don't like Mind Rots. I think they're boring, and I don't want to include it. So I have it as an insta-cut. What do you think?
I mean, I think we have enough discard already, and like more interesting and more fun discard than this.
Yep.
Why bother?
Here.
Let's cut it.
All right. That's a deep analysis right there. You want to take us home with our last card in black for Champions?
Yes, I do. Let's end on a high note with Wicked Akuba. BB for a 2/2 spirit. With B, target player dealt damage by Wicked Akuba this turn loses 1 life. So on its face, this is just a kind of a bad bear, but this ability, and specifically this ability in a mono black deck, is pretty exciting to me. Like, if you can get in with Wicked Akuba and you have some mana open, he can just beat your opponent down mercilessly. And I'd kind of like to see 4 of these.
Oh, wow.
I really want to. I mean, I think the only other card we've gone 4X on so far was Candle's Glow. And I feel like
this is your Candle's
Glow. This is my Candle's Glow. And this is kind of, it's the flip side of Candle's Glow. Candle's Glow is gaining you life. Mm-hmm. Wicked Akuba is draining life.
Mm-hmm. Well, not draining. Careful, because I'm sure I'll misread this at some point as thinking you gain life. Yeah, I like this card a lot. It's cool. It's interesting. I really like how aggressive black is in this set. I feel like black doesn't always fill that role. That's more commonly white or red or something. And I like it on the Akuba here. And it's unique, too. It looks sort of unassuming. Like, oh, yeah, he's like a bear for double black, which incidentally at this stage in black's history, just getting a 2/2 for 2 with no downsides is like, that's not too bad just on its own. And then you throw on this ability that, I mean, that's super relevant. Even if you just do it on 3, that's like this thing swinging in for 5 damage on turn 3. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah, and it's nice how scalable it is too. If you get this in the early game, he's definitely having an impact. If you get it in the later game and your opponent's not able to block it for whatever reason, you're getting a ton of life loss in there. And it also feels like pretty fair to me because there's no fear here. There's no evasion, at least by default. This can be blocked. It can be dealt with like any other creature. So it's not totally running away with the game. And the fact that you need to commit so heavily into black mana to make this be super powerful is, kind of a drawback.
It leans into that kind of classic black color pie identity, right? Of like black wants you to play lots of black cards. And I like that this pushes you in that direction, as you were saying.
Yeah. Now, do you think that 4 Akubas is too many Akubas?
I don't think so. I suspect we're going a little high on a lot of cards. And, before we really get down to serious playtesting, we're going to have to go back through and go like, do we really want 3, Villainous Ogres in? But I'm fine starting this on 4. I think, as you said, like if there's a card that deserves it as a fair yet powerful and interesting card that helps define an archetype, I think Wicked Akuba gets there.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I really like the art here. It's another Itoku piece, and it's creepy but not disgusting, which is a nice change of pace. And it's got just some nice color, and I don't know, it's just really good. I really like it. It's well realized.
Yeah, it looks wicked for sure.
Yeah, like a little mischievous, but not just mischievous. He's also going to kill you.
Here's the flavor text really adds to that. The sound of children weeping is a song that fills its heart with joy.
Man, he's so wicked.
He is so wicked. Kind of a weird suggestion there that Kami, I guess, have hearts that can be filled with joy. So, yeah, something to think about.
Hearts and legions. They look more like us than we know. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's stick 4 of them, and if that proves to be just disturbingly powerful, we can always cut it down later.
All right, I like it.
Well, I just glanced outside my window, and I can see the night's reach is starting to close in.
Mm-hmm.
I hope, listener, that rather than this turning into a night of Soul's betrayal, that this has proved to be a night dealings of magic insight. If you have feedback, thoughts, or memories to share about any of the cards and topics today, or if you just want to tell us to make these outro puns a little less painful, you can always email us at clockspinningpodcast@gmail.com. We particularly love if you can share memories of cards you've played with or cards you know. So just take a look at the red card spoiler for this set and see if there's anything that sparks something we'd love to share. You can also follow along with the Cube on Cube Cobra. Just go to clockspinning.com and you'll find a link. But next week, join us as we review the first 25 red cards of Kamigawa. And until then, I'm Austin.
I'm Connor.
Thanks for listening.